Hello, my name is Sarah Amani, and I'm the Youth Mental Health Network Lead, currently working at Surrey and Borders NHS Foundation Trust. I'm going to be presenting the MyJourney Youth Mental Health app, which we developed with young people accessing the early intervention and psychosis team. The layout of my presentation is to give you a brief background and also look at what already exists in terms of health apps that are already out there. And then looking at whether an app a day keeps the doctor away. So what is the evidence of impact of health apps? And then sharing with you our aspirations with regards to where we're taking this app. I've always been fascinated by technology and in particular at how quickly it's evolving. So when Apple released the iMac in 1998, in all its wonderful colors, we didn't realize that within 10 years they would produce something that was not only faster but a lot smaller. And the rate at which technology evolves is like nothing else. So I've always really been interested in that, and that has recently also been reinforced by this fact that our mobile phones, our smartphones, have more computing power than all of NASA in 1969, which I find quite an interesting statistic, really. When young people accessing our services told us that they're using their smartphones more and more for things like banking, shopping, arranging social events, but that they were having to almost switch off that part of themselves when they accessed our service, we had to think carefully about what that means. So we actually thought that this was something that we needed to explore a bit more. So I started to look at what smartphones our young people were using. At that point, I think this was in 2010, Ofcom had released some statistics showing that 52% of the population now own a smartphone. And the most common platform on those smartphones is currently Android, seconded by BlackBerry, and the iPhone, iOS, coming in third. Not only was I interested in what type of smartphones people were using, but I was also interested in how young people were using this technology. So through observation and speaking to them, they did say that they do not use their smartphones as a sole activity, so they will be doing multiple things and using their smartphone. So when we were looking at their idea of developing a bespoke mobile app for youth mental health, we had to acknowledge that there's a lot going on in young people's lives, and this app had to somehow catch their attention whilst they're doing other things. So it had to be glanceable, it had to be simple, it had to be intuitive in accordance to the lifestyle of young people. And that led us to a fundamental principle in the project, which was to try and develop something that isn't intrusive. It had to echo this quote from Mark Weiser, who talks about the most profound technologies literally disappear. We don't even notice them because they're being helpful without being in our face. So that's something that we were kind of aiming for with regards to how we design this mobile app. And I'm not from technology background in terms of my training. I'm a mental health nurse, so to keep things simple for my own understanding, I've started to look at smartphones as a blank platform. So dependent on what apps you have on the smartphone, it can take on different functions almost week by week if you choose to. So if you have a lot of apps for music, it can become a music player, or if you have a lot of gaming apps, it becomes a gaming console. And likewise, if you have a very useful health app, then it also becomes a health management tool. However, when looking at developing the app, we had to acknowledge that there's already a lot of health apps out there. So this is a statistic that's already changed, in that there are 20,000 health apps on iTunes alone. And when you consider other platforms, there's more than 200,000 apps that are already in existence. And as of 2012, there were 247 million health apps downloaded globally. So there's obviously a lot of health apps already in existence. And one thing we didn't want to do is create something that just adds to the noise and sits on a phone without being useful. So we looked at what wasn't there, and even though the prevalence of mental illness is something that is quite obvious, so 1 in 4 people have a mental health issue, 75% of mental illness starts off before young people are 25. There wasn't really much out there apart from apps for mood and anxiety, but there wasn't anything relating to psychosis. So we thought this was something that we needed to try and address. So we started off by looking at what's already in existence, like I said, and looking at the research to show whether it's useful or not. So we kind of scoured the internet and other literature to look at whether health apps, mental health apps in particular, are showing any conclusive results that show that they're useful in helping people to manage their mental health. There wasn't really much out there, so we thought that actually as long as we're developing something, we might also evaluate its impact on health outcomes. Whilst we thought it was a great idea in Surrey, we weren't too sure about what the rest of the country were doing or thinking about mental health apps. So when the Department of Health announced a crowdsourcing competition in 2011, which basically asked the public to submit ideas for health apps, we submitted our idea for an early intervention in psychosis app. And we're quite flattered when that was voted 7th out of 495 ideas that were submitted by the public. For us, this was also an indication that this was something that we needed to forge forward with. So we started then looking at funding to fund the development of this app. Initially, we involved a student who was doing coursework in computer science who was keen to do some work that would not only help him learn how to develop apps, but also hopefully would end up developing something that could be used by people in real terms. So we started off with an idea, which we've already touched on, and then a young person accessing our service actually came up with a metaphor and named the app MyJourney. He named it MyJourney because he basically feels, and I would agree with this, that everybody's journey of recovery is very individual. And the app needs to take that into account and needs to help people wherever they're starting from to manage their mental health and to gain more self-awareness and understanding of what helps them feel better and function better. So the first phase was to look at what we already have in early intervention psychosis services, and we had a very well-received website, which we also created with young people accessing our service. It was actually highly commended by the Health Service Journal, our award in 2011 for innovation in mental health. So this wasn't an entirely new area for us to kind of enter. So we thought we already have a website which has some very useful information, and we could use some of that content in the app. So what you're seeing right now is the first prototype, which was very basic, but it gave us an opportunity to play around with the app on a phone and test it so that we could then iterate and improve its functionality. The second phase in September 2012 was to identify a software developer that could refine the app from our various tests. So we actually then kind of made the function a little less basic, but also still trying to retain the usability factor, which is key. We were lucky enough to have 20 young people volunteer to test the app for a couple of weeks. So they basically took away the phones with the app, as well as questionnaire on several dimensions that we thought they could help us rate, so that we could be guided by them on what we can improve of the app. And this slide just shows you the first attempt at the medication reminder. We started off just looking at not only did we want the app to give people reminders, but we also wanted people to know what that medication was for, how to use it safely, and any side effects. So any input of a medication they want to be reminded of also links to verifiable evidence-based information about that medication that they're taking. Another function that was something that young people wanted was a way to locate local services. So if the user allows the app to have GPS functionality, then they can actually locate the local mental health services, find out about how far away they are from that service, the address, and the telephone number, so that they can also contact that service if they need to. With so many health apps already in existence, one of the biggest questions is how come very few people are using these apps. So we sat around and actually looked at some of the hoops that an app has to go through to gain successful adoption. So I think the key and first thing it has to prove is that it's safe and reliable. It also has to show some kind of clinical effectiveness, so it has to have a positive impact on clinical outcomes. It also has to be sustainable, so it has to jump through some economic hurdles, looking at the business models to make it self-sustaining. And you also have to consider the impact it has not on just one pathway, but other care pathways. So what impact does it have on the young person using the GP service, for instance, or hospitals? And lastly, but also very important, is the end user's preference and whether they like and enjoy using the app, because without that, then it will not be adopted. Of course, not all evidence is created equally when looking at how to prove the impact of the app. So we have the golden standard, which is randomized controlled trials. The trouble with aiming for the golden standard with this sort of technology is that RCTs take very long time, but also a lot of resources. So what you can end up with is completing an RCT on the technology, but the technology has already evolved. So your RCT is redundant before you're even done. So there has to be a compromise, a middle ground, where you have reliable evidence that has been sourced in a very rigorous way, but doesn't take quite as long and maybe not doesn't need as many resources. So this slide basically just breaks down those advantages and disadvantages between interventional research like an RCT as opposed to observational. So what you get with RCTs, of course, is that you are low on bias, and but that you do have to have quite a lot of resources, and it does take time, and you have to control quite a lot of the environment. Whereas with observational research, it is about the real world, and however that can introduce, of course, a lot of variables, and bias is also quite likely. As to what type of research we might consider, this is just an example of a hypothesis about mobile apps in mental health generally. So we could hypothesize that mobile apps are effective adjuncts for treating mental health issues, and that medication adherence is a common issue in mental health, and that improving medication adherence can reduce relapse, and that when you reduce relapse, you reduce hospital admissions. So in a nutshell, that could be something like mobile health apps are effective adjuncts for improving adherence and reducing hospitalizations, which in turn reduces healthcare expenditure. So just reinstating the fundamental areas for investigation or research, really. With regards to safety, I think you need to consider regulation, information governance, data protection. So one of the things that health apps anybody developing health apps has to consider is whether this is something that is just an information self-help tool, or whether it's crossing the boundary into a medical device in some way. So you have to really consider, I think, these 4 domains to make sure that your product is safe. There has been some research on mobile health technologies. So this is a study by Carolyn Free and colleagues, which came out earlier this year, and they looked at the effectiveness of mobile health technologies in improving healthcare service delivery. And they looked at 42 trials in a meta-analysis. 11 of those trials showed statistically significant benefits in communication between the clinician and the person using the service. One study actually showed less accuracy in diagnosis, and this was a study on a health app which allowed somebody to remotely take a picture which could then be used to diagnose melanoma. So quite a variety of studies there, but their conclusions were basically that there were moderate benefits from things like SMS text technologies to try and reduce DNA rates. But ultimately, that high-quality trials measuring clinical outcomes are needed, because that's where fundamentally we're lacking any evidence to show whether health apps are making any difference to clinical outcomes. What we have evaluated of this health app, as I stated earlier, is its usability. So 20 young people using the service tried it out, and out of the features that are included in the app, they said the health information and health tips is one of the best feature, followed by the medication reminder and pill tracker. In terms of what young people told us they'll use the app for, it's to find out about their mental health and well-being, and to keep track of how they feel were the most commonly chosen uses. As to what we hope to move towards, at the moment all the data that the app collects stays on the mobile device. It doesn't go anywhere else, which limits its usability in clinical settings somewhat. So we're exploring whether there's feasibility of connecting that data to a clinician in real time, so that the young person can track how they're doing, but also their clinician can also track how things are going and tailor the care plan according to some of the new data from the app. So that's basically all there is with the Youth Mental Health app, and these are my contact details if you want to get in touch.
If you would like to know more about the MyJourney app, why not follow these links to YouTube videos in which young users and service providers explain its benefits. And if you would like to download the app for free, it is available from this link.